Until I was 12, my mother was my entire world. We shared a silent connection, made up of knowing glances, afternoons watching old movies, and impromptu dinners. I believed nothing could separate us, but that nothing gained a name and a surname, Alfredo. He came into our lives with his shiny car and charming promises. At first he was just Mommy's friend, but within a few weeks I was sleeping over and talking like I owned everything. My mom changed with him. She started dressing up too much, ignoring me, canceling our plans. I saw the transformation, but I didn't know what to do. I just felt a tightness that wouldn't go away. Then the conversation began. Marta, my mother, said I would study in another city, live with my Aunt Lucia. She said it as if it were a gift, an opportunity, but I knew it was a dismissal. I cried. I begged. She said it was for my own good. And just like that, I was sent away like an old piece of furniture. At Aunt Lucia's house, everything was different. She was strict, unaffected, but she gave me shelter and food. She never spoke ill of my mother, just watched me with sad eyes. The years passed, and with them, my hope for reconciliation faded. Marta stopped calling. She forgot my birthdays. I stopped trying. Even so, she remained alive within me. With each victory I achieved, I wondered, would she see this with pride? But her absence spoke louder. Until one day, years later, my cell phone rang. It was a strange number. A nervous voice said, "Alfredo isn't who you think. He's involved in something serious," and then hung up. I felt a chill in my stomach. Could it be true? I began to investigate, more on impulse than conviction. I went to Alfredo's profile, reviewed photos, posts, and news reports. Everything seemed too fake, too staged. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just angry, I was suspicious. I grabbed my laptop and started putting together a dossier. I cross-referenced names, companies, dates. I noticed suspicious patterns. 3 bankrupt companies, missing partners. Alfredo always emerged unscathed. Something was wrong, and I didn't just want to know the truth. I wanted to expose it. I made a decision I'd long avoided, returning to the city where it all began, but not as a needy daughter. I would return as a grown woman, determined to unravel every lie. This time, it wasn't me who was leaving. It was the farce he'd constructed. Before I continue, I want to ask something very important. If this story has touched you so far, subscribe to the channel now and leave a like. This helps us bring you more stories of betrayal, revenge, emotion, and liberation. And don't forget, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing how far our stories go. Arriving in the city was like stepping back into an old movie, only without the happy soundtrack. The terminal, the streets, the smells, everything was the same. But I was different. I carried within me a silent urgency, a mission, and at the center of it, Alfredo smiled in the photos like a man above suspicion. Aunt Lucia welcomed me with a dry but sincere hug. He didn't ask the reason for my visit. He simply prepared a room, as if he knew. That night, I set up my war headquarters on the old sofa in the living room. I opened my laptop, spread out papers, and connected the dots. Alfredo's name kept appearing in the wrong places. I went downtown, where he had once owned a business. I pretended to be interested in renting office space and struck up a conversation with the receptionist. The mere mention of his name was enough to reveal her discomfort. "He disappeared after a scam on investors," she murmured. No one wanted to say much. Fear, distrust, complicit silence. I went back and called Leo, an old childhood friend. He agreed to help without hesitation. Together, we began to assemble a bulletin board with dates, names, and connections. Alfredo was a living web of fraud disguised as success, and my mother was either an accomplice or blind. Neither option gave me peace of mind. We discovered that Alfredo had used my mother's name to open accounts and access credit. She was being used, financially and emotionally, but did she know? I wanted to believe not, but the way she always pushed me away when he was around left me doubtful. One day, I went to the house where I grew up. I stood across the street. Alfredo was washing the car. Martha came out and kissed him. They seemed happy. It hurt me. I wasn't part of that image. It was as if I'd never existed. And at the same time, I knew that happiness was built on lies. I returned determined to find something more concrete. It was then that I found an old contract, signed by my father and Alfredo. They had been partners, and just before my father's death, their company mysteriously went bankrupt. My heart sank. This wasn't just about my mother. It was about destroying my family's history. That night, I looked at the mural and made a decision. I would go all the way. not just for myself, but for everything that had been taken from me. Alfredo wouldn't come out unscathed, and my mother, well, she would have to choose again, but this time the consequences would be real. I started sleeping less. Each new clue led me to another, and each discovery made my stomach churn. I found more documents. Alfredo had registered properties in other people's names, scamming vulnerable elderly people with promises of safe investments. Some of them lost everything. Others weren't even alive to tell the tale. The dirt was so deep that I began to understand why everyone was afraid to speak out. But nothing shook me as much as what I discovered about my father. I found records of bank transfers between him and Alfredo, shortly before the collapse of their joint business. Afterward, my father quickly fell ill. I remember nights when he coughed incessantly, saying he was tired. The bankruptcy consumed him, and now I suspected Alfredo had pulled the rug out from under him. He was more than an abusive stepfather. He might have destroyed my family from the beginning. I shared everything with Leo. He was shocked, but he also became more engaged. He introduced me to an investigative journalist, Augusto, who had heard about Alfredo in other cities. Together we began to build a solid dossier, with evidence, testimonies, and public documents. But I wanted more. I wanted to take him down where it hurt most, in public, in front of everyone he'd deceived. That's when I learned that Alfredo would be honored at a local charity event, hosted by local business owners. It would be perfect. Marta would be there. The press would be there. And if everything went as planned, his mask would fall in front of everyone. It was risky, but I couldn't let this opportunity pass. I was going to show my mother, and the world, who he really was. Meanwhile, Marta sought me out. She went to Aunt Lucia's house, furious. She said I was stalking Alfredo, making things up out of spite. She tried to humiliate me. She said if I continued, I would regret it. I looked into her eyes and saw fear, not of herself, but of what she would have to admit if it were all true. I tried to tell her I had proof. She refused to listen. She screamed. She called me ungrateful. After she left, I cried. I cried like I hadn't cried in years. It wasn't just because she didn't believe me. It was because I knew that, even when faced with the truth, she preferred to protect the lie. It destroyed me inside, but it also strengthened me. I wasn't trying to save our relationship anymore. I was just fighting to end the charade. Augusto managed to find a contact within the event organizers. With his help, we put together a detailed plan. I would have access to the main screen for a few minutes, just enough to show the video with the evidence. The police would be informed in advance. Everything had to be timed. This was the chance of a lifetime, the chance to put an end to everything. The day before the event, I didn't sleep. I replayed everything 1,000 times. Every frame from the video, every word from the speech. Deep down, there was still a part of me that wanted my mother to believe me sooner, to call me, to say, I know you're right. But the phone didn't ring, and in that silence, I found my answer. The room was packed. The lights were low, the tables were decorated with floral arrangements, and fake laughter echoed. I entered discreetly, wearing the badge Augusto had obtained for me. Alfredo was talking to politicians, smiling as always. Marta stood beside him, elegantly dressed like a first lady. It all seemed like an expensive performance, but I knew the truth, and that truth pulsed in the flash drive I carried in my pocket. I waited for the right moment. When the master of ceremonies announced the tribute, Alfredo took the stage and began his speech on business ethics and social commitment. It was surreal to hear. My fingers were shaking. I walked to the technical area and handed the flash drive to the operator, who had already been instructed. At the next transition, release this, I whispered. He nodded. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. The lights dimmed. The screen came on. The video began. Images of documents, audio recordings, victim testimonies. Alfredo's name plastered across lawsuits, his ties to bankrupt companies, his fraud, his connections to my father. A buzz filled the room. Alfredo froze. Marta stared at the screen, pale. Within seconds, the room erupted into pandemonium. The police arrived, as expected. One of the officers took the stage and announced that Alfredo was being detained for questioning. Some applauded. Others filmed. Marta cried in shock. I tried to get closer, but she backed away as if I were a threat. You destroyed everything, she whispered. I wanted to tell her it wasn't me, it was him, but the words wouldn't come. I could only stare at her with a pain I couldn't contain. The press surrounded Alfredo as he was led away. I left through the sidelines with Leo and Augusto. I didn't want to give interviews. I wanted silence. I took a deep breath as I left the room. It was done. The truth had been told, but I felt no relief. I felt a strange emptiness, as if the victory had cost me more than I expected, because in the end, what I really wanted was my mother back. In the days that followed, the story exploded across the city. Headlines on local websites, interviews with victims, and social media coverage. Alfredo would be indicted. The public prosecutor's office opened an investigation. Marta, however, disappeared from public life. You didn't answer my messages. Not a single call. Nothing. Her silence was more painful than any words. Leo tried to cheer me up. He told me I'd done the right thing, that many people would be spared thanks to my courage. Maybe it was true, but at night, lying in Aunt Lucia's bed, I wondered if it had been worth it. Not because I doubted justice, but because it still hurt too much to know my mother chose the wrong side until the end. I didn't know if she would ever come back. I didn't know if I wanted her to. I just knew that now. I could finally look at myself in the mirror without shame. The truth had set me free, even if it meant being alone. The next few days were strange. I walked around the city like a shadow, recognized by some, avoided by others. Some people stopped to thank me, telling me I had served justice. Others just looked at me with pity or judgment. But what hurt me most was what Inovia, my mother. No calls, no messages, nothing. I tried not to get my hopes up, but I failed. Every time my phone vibrated, my heart raced. It was just some random notification. Sometimes I'd write her messages and delete them before sending them. Other times I'd wonder what she thought of me. Did she regret it? Or did she genuinely hate me for exposing everything? A week later, Aunt Lucia's doorbell rang. It was a delivery man, carrying a small box. Inside was a single letter, handwritten in a handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. My mother began by saying she couldn't look me in the eye, that she felt embarrassed, but she never apologized. She spoke of fear. She said Alfredo was everything she believed she needed: stability, affection, protection, and that when doubts arose, she chose to ignore them because admitting the truth hurt more than enduring the lie. She said she knew I was right, but she didn't know how to live with it, and so she preferred silence. I closed the letter with trembling hands. I cried. It wasn't the apology I wanted, but it was something, a break. Maybe it was the most she could give me at the moment. Part of me still wanted to run to her, tell her I was hurt too, but the other part knew it wasn't time yet. I decided to move on. I went back to working remotely from Aunt Lucia's house while I organized everything to move to another city. I received invitations for interviews, podcasts, even a book-length report. I turned down almost all of them. I didn't want to turn my pain into a spectacle. I just wanted to live in peace. For the first time, I was the one choosing. Before leaving, I went to the house where I grew up. No one answered. But inside the mailbox, I left an envelope with old photos of me and my mother, childhood letters, and a single handwritten sentence: "Whenever you want to talk, I'll be ready." After that, I closed that chapter of my life with the dignity she was never able to give me. Weeks later, I received another letter. It wasn't from my mother or anyone I knew. It was anonymous, but in it was a copy of a deed and a name: Beatrice, dating back years. A possible involvement between Alfredo and another woman, or perhaps another victim. I looked at it calmly. The past wasn't over, but now I was ready, not for revenge, but for the truth, always.